In September 1674, a Puritan missionary named John Eliot stood on a rock in what is now Connecticut and told 150 Nipmuc people they were saved. 12 years later, he led the English settlers who took their land because he knew no one was left to stop them. How does a community of 150 people, documented by name, their corn still growing in the fields, vanish so completely that the town built on top of them never learned their name? To understand that, we have to go back. Not to the war, not to the settlers. We have to go back to the man who actually built what was destroyed. His name was Sampson. Not Eliot, Sampson. He was a Nipmuc man, son of Petuhanet, sachem of Hassanamisit, educated at schools connected to Harvard's Indian College. Around 1670, he walked alone into the Connecticut interior and began building. The place was called Wabaquasset. It sat at the convergence of three major indigenous trail systems: the crossroads of Nipmuc country, on the road between Hartford and Boston, between Providence and Albany. Not a marginal outpost, a strategic node in a living network that had functioned for thousands of years. Sampson spent 4 years there, alone at first, then with growing company. He gathered 30 families, established worship, organized the community. Within 4 years, he had built what John Eliot would one day visit and call a miracle. Eliot visited for 1 day. The community is Sampson's work. That distinction matters, because the story of who built this place is the same story as who was deleted from it. By the autumn of 1674, Wabaquasset was thriving. Daniel Gookin, the colonial magistrate who supervised the praying towns, arrived with Eliot on September 15th. What they found was not a struggling outpost. It was a fort, described in colonial records as the second fort in the Nipmuc country. A 60-foot wigwam at its center, 40 acres of corn in the fields, 150 people from 30 families. The following morning, people came from across the region, from Myonexit, from Quinnitissit, from villages throughout Nipmuc country. They gathered at the rock on Plaine Hill. Sampson opened the service, reading from Psalm 119. Eliot preached to them in their own language, from Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you. At the adjacent community that same year, a man named Daniel Takawambate was appointed minister, possibly the first ordained Native American minister in North America. This was the height of what the praying town system had produced, documented in ink, celebrated by the missionary establishment of New England. It would be destroyed within 12 months. King Philip's War erupted in the summer of 1675. The Nipmuc were drawn in, but Wabaquasset sat in Connecticut, not Massachusetts, and that line mattered. When Massachusetts colony moved to protect its praying Indian communities, those protections stopped at the colonial border. A line on a map left 150 people exposed. The community fractured. Some Wabaquasset Nipmucs sided with the English and their Mohegan allies. Some joined the Nipmuc uprising. And Sampson, the man who had spent 4 years building all of this, what he chose when the war came, the record does not say. That silence is not a gap. It is the record telling you something. Major John Talcott of Norwich commanded Connecticut colony's military operations. Through the summer of 1676, Talcott swept Connecticut and Rhode Island, capturing Algonquian people and transporting them out of the colonies as slaves. 70 Wabaquasset people, men, women, and children, walked into Norwich to surrender. Then the record goes silent. Where they went, what happened to them, whether they were enslaved or scattered or simply erased from the documents, No record says. English forces marched through Wabaquasset that summer. They burned the corn. They demolished the fort at Quinitisset. A community 4 years in the building was physically emptied in the season. The corn was still growing when they arrived. Someone had planted it. No one was left to harvest it. Most people would assume the story ended there. Here is what they don't tell you. It was only half over. In 1682, Massachusetts colony purchased this territory, but they did not purchase it from the Nipmuc, the people who had built the fort, planted the corn, and gathered on the rock at Plaine Hill. They purchased it from the Mohegans, a nation that had never held a claim to Wabaquasset land. The Nipmuc were not at the table. Their territorial rights were extinguished through a transaction they were not party to, a legal deal between their colonizers and a rival indigenous nation, arranged before a single English settler broke ground. This was not the residue of combat. This was architecture. The dispossession had been designed. There was one more instrument. His name was Black James, known also as Willamachine, a Nipmuc man appointed constable of the praying towns by Daniel Gookin. After the war, Black James signed away thousands of acres of Quinitisset land to English buyers. A Nipmuc hand held the pen. Whether he acted under coercion, in desperation, or through some calculation of survival, the documents do not say. What they record is the transaction, the acreage, the transfer. The colonial machine was sophisticated enough that it did not require only outside force. 3 hands completed the dispossession: Talcott's fist, the Mohegan purchaser's pen, and whatever Black James believed he was doing when he signed. On April 5th, 1686, 13 men left Roxbury, Massachusetts. They were called the 13 Goers. They were headed for Wabaquasset, emptied by war, purchased from a nation with no claim to it, signed away in the long aftermath. They were guided there by John Eliot, the same John Eliot who had stood on the rock at Plaine Hill in September 1674 and preached salvation to 150 Nipmuc people. He knew the land was fertile. He knew it was sparsely populated. He knew that because he had been there 12 years earlier when the people were still alive. Cold Open's verdict is now proven, not alleged, documented. The missionary who praised the community, who recorded their lives in the same ink that still survives, was the person who led their replacement to the cleared ground. He preached salvation from that rock. Then he used what he learned there to give the land away. The 13 Goers called their settlement New Roxbury. 4 years later, it was renamed Woodstock. The name Wabaquasset does not appear on any road sign in South Woodstock, Connecticut, but one word survived: Quasset. Still in the landscape, on signs, in local names, in the daily speech of people who have driven past it their whole lives without stopping to ask where it came from. The name was never fully removed. It endured in the mouths of people who did not know what they were saying. The Nipmuc are not gone. The Chobanagungamog Band, the Hassanamisco Band, living communities, documented descendants, people who trace their ancestry to this land. The rock at Plaine Hill still stands. South Woodstock looks exactly like what you think New England looks like. The stone walls, the rolling farmland, the pastoral quiet. That is not an accident. It was installed on a specific, documented erasure by named people with documented motives, completed by military force, legal paperwork, and the personal knowledge of a celebrated missionary. The pastoral landscape is not timeless. It has a date, and the date is April 5th, 1686. This channel exists because stories like this one are still in the ground under places we think we know. The Nipmuc name for this land survived 350 years in the mouths of people who didn't know what they were saying, which means it was never fully taken. Next time, we're staying in this same corridor. Another King Philip's War erasure. Another town that looks like timeless New England. Another name hiding in plain sight. We'll see you there.